Shalom from Israel to all of the Daystar viewers around the world. I'm Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer and founder of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible when David said in Psalm 25:5, "Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." And God says in Zechariah 8:16, "These are the things that you shall do. Speak out the truth to one another. Judge with truth and judgment to peace in your gates. And always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El Rome.
And I'm Erin Viner.
In our top story, Israel is reeling from the UN Security Council's unanimous approval of the Iranian nuclear deal. On the same day that European Union foreign ministers and the United Nations approved the disastrous agreement, Iranian leaders vehemently denied Germany's request to recognize the existence of the State of Israel. Also that day, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, tweeted a video calling for Israel's destruction. After the agreement was fast-tracked through the UN, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to take the fight to the U.S. Congress, who is still enforcing sanctions against the hardline Islamic Republic. Jerusalem remains determined to prevent Tehran from obtaining nuclear weapons, which Israel fears will be used in an attempt to destroy the Jewish state. Netanyahu responded to the UN and the EU's swift approval of the accord, saying history has proven that even when the world is united, it is not necessarily right.
A court in Iran has ruled that the United States must pay the country $50 billion for what the justices said were heavy losses and damages America inflicted on the country following the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Tehran's deep disdain for Washington was further fueled by the ruling theocracy after the signing of the atomic pact with the world powers, when the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, praised his people for calling for America's destruction. Despite the agreement, the government in the rogue republic remains adamant that the United Nations inspectors will never be allowed access to their nuclear sites.
Naghmeh Abedini, the wife of imprisoned Christian pastor Saeed Abedini, accused the United States of betraying her husband after the Obama administration excluded him from the nuclear deal it brokered with Iran. Pastor Saeed is one of 3 U.S. citizens known to be imprisoned in the Islamic Republic. Their status was ignored by the American negotiating team as they pushed forward the talks regarding Tehran's rogue nuclear program. Pastor Saeed was sentenced to 8 years in prison for setting up home-based Christian churches in Iran. His health has suffered from persecution, severe beatings, and extended stays in solitary confinement.
The suicide bomber that murdered 32 young people and wounded scores of others in Turkey last week has been identified as a member of the Islamic State terror group. The blast ripped through the southern town of Surac near the border with Syria, where the Turkish government has been engaged in fierce battle with ISIS to stabilize the area. The terrorists have slipped into Turkey among the waves of Syrian and Kurdish refugees spilling over the border, bringing the conflict with them. One representative from Ankara said that the bombing comes in retaliation for efforts by the Turkish government to fight terrorism.
Knowing all too well the devastation of Islamic terrorism, Israel has offered its condolences after a Muslim opened fire on U.S. servicemen in Tennessee last week. The gunman killed 4 Marines, a sailor, and badly wounded a police officer in his rampage. The attacker was a Kuwaiti national, but his father is a Palestinian with a long history of involvement in Islamic terrorism. Just before committing the attacks, the terrorist, Mohammed Yusuf Abdulaziz, sent messages to a friend quoting an Islamic text that refers to declaring war against non-believers.
The Palestinian Authority has announced that it succeeded in thwarting a series of major terrorist plots by Hamas, with the arrests of 250 members of the radical Islamist group operating in Judea and Samaria. Among those detained is a notorious cell of veteran Hamas militants, all of whom were released to Gaza from Israeli prisons in 2011. The Israeli Shin Bet security agency also launched a wave of raids, arresting a number of Palestinian terrorists, including the perpetrators of several recent terror attacks. 5 were arrested for the brutal murder of 25-year-old Danny Gonen, who stopped his car after being waved down for help by an Arab who instead shot him in cold blood last month. The murderer is an employee of the Palestinian Authority who was released from Israeli incarceration as part of the prisoner exchange for captured IDF soldier Gilad Shalit. He admitted to the premeditated planning of the ambush, as well as 6 other shooting attacks this year. And in a separate sweep, 4 members of the Hamas cell who murdered Malachi Rosenfeld and wounded 3 others were also arrested. The Palestinian gunmen told investigators that they opened fire in the car carrying the young boys who were returning home from a basketball game, as well as on an ambulance near the Jewish city of Beit El. The mastermind of that cell was also released as part of a prisoner swap. Israeli media is reporting that several of the terrorists who were freed 4 years ago to secure the freedom of Israel's young soldier have returned to terrorist activity, and Yochanan has more on that.
That's right, Aaron. Israelis were outraged to learn that 6 of their fellow countrymen have been murdered by convicted and once imprisoned Palestinian terrorists, all of whom were freed as part of a prisoner swap 4 years ago. Back in 2011, Israel agreed to release 1,027 convicted Palestinian terrorists in exchange for Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier who had been kidnapped and held hostage by Hamas for more than 5 years. These terrorists returned to their villages as heroes of the Intifada, and many of them resumed their terrorist ways by planning, funding, and perpetrating attacks.
3 more Christians have been reportedly abducted by the Islamic State in Libya, where the terrorists have been engaged in fierce combat for control of the North African nation. Dozens of Christians have been abducted and executed in videos broadcast around the world. The group's brutality is also evident by its use of children in their vicious holy war. There have been several accounts of the terrorists forcing young children to carry out suicide attacks in Syria, just as the country's Observatory for Human Rights reports that more than 50 children under the age of 16 have been killed just since the beginning of this year. The youngsters have been identified as the so-called Cubs of the Caliphate, who were abducted from their families and made to train for fighting and participation in ruthless executions on behalf of the Islamic State.
Worldwide anti-Semitism has reached pre-World War II levels. This according to Abe Foxman, the outgoing director of the Anti-Defamation League. In an interview with the Times of Israel, Foxman warned that no Jewish community outside of Israel is immune to the dangers of anti-Semitism. Just last week, a Jewish family in Paris was attacked in their home. The parents and their daughter were seriously injured when 3 masked gunmen brutally beat them, saying they did so because the family is Jewish. This is just another in a series of horrific attacks against the Jews of France. So far this year, there have been more than 500 anti-Semitic incidents, which is an increase of over 84% from 2014. The worst, of course, was the attack on a Jewish market by an Islamic terrorist in which 4 people were murdered. The drastic rise in attacks and anti-Semitic sentiment has resulted in a record number of Jews fleeing their homes in France and immigrating to Israel.
Several American Jewish publications are reporting the possibility that Jonathan Pollard may be released from prison in 4 months. Pollard was a civilian intelligence analyst for the United States Navy and convicted in 1985 of divulging state secrets to Israel. He's still the only American citizen to have been sentenced to life in prison for passing classified information to an ally, while the median term for such an offense is generally 2 to 4 years. His projected release date by the Bureau of Prisons is November 21st, 2015, at which time he will have served 30 years behind bars. The 61-year-old is suffering declining health and has been admitted to hospital several times during his incarceration. Israel has repeatedly appealed for his freedom, and many are hoping that the Justice Department will not object to his release.
Israel and China have solidified an agreement to increase trade between the two countries. The deal provides an additional $500 million to the current package, bringing the total financing to $2.6 billion. The package is meant to stimulate and encourage Israeli exports to the Far East. The Israeli Finance Ministry said that economic ties between Jerusalem and Beijing have been increasing. Since 2010, export transactions totaling more than $100 million have already been completed. The areas of cooperation have focused on medical equipment, education, agriculture, communication, and transportation.
We are happy to announce that Gil Rosenberg has safely returned to Israel after fighting ISIS terrorists in Syria and Iraq. The 31-year-old moved from Canada to Israel several years ago when she enlisted in the IDF. She was the first foreign woman to serve with the Kurdish Peshmerga Forces elite all-female unit. Rosenberg told reporters upon her return to the Jewish state that she was compelled to join the fight against ISIS because she could never again allow a genocide like the Holocaust to occur. She says that she's now dedicated to raising awareness about the atrocities committed by the radical jihadi group, as well as the desperate humanitarian crisis that it's leaving in the wake of its bloody, destructive path.
There has been a 500% increase in the number of Israelis earning academic degrees. The Central Bureau of Statistics has reported that the number of degrees earned by Israelis has multiplied 5 times since 1990. Just last year, 75,100 diplomas in higher education were awarded to students throughout the Jewish state. The poll also reflected that more Israeli women than men have obtained higher education academic certificates. In 2013, 59.5% of bachelor's degrees, 60% of master's degrees, and nearly half of PhDs were earned by women in Israel.
Israeli archaeologists have painstakingly identified an ancient burned parchment as the Book of Leviticus. The scorched fragments were discovered nearly 45 years ago and have remained in storage until advances in modern forensic technology made it possible to scan them. The scroll was discovered inside the Holy Ark of an ancient synagogue at the Ein Gedi excavations on the western shore of the Dead Sea. Using micro-CT scanning and digital imaging software, technicians were able to virtually unwrap the scroll and were amazed to read the first 8 verses of the Book of Leviticus. According to carbon dating, it is 1,500 years old. Penina Shor, who is the curator of the Israeli Antiquities Authority, described the extraordinary discovery as the most significant find of an ancient Bible after the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here on our rooftop studio in a beautiful day in Jerusalem. My guest today is Neil Lazarus. He's the founder of AwesomeSeminars.com. Neil, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back in Jerusalem in the Holy City.
Neil, tell our viewers a little about what is AwesomeSeminars.com.
AwesomeSeminars.com is a web-based site training people to be advocates for Israel. Our intention is to strengthen the message of Israel, whether to Christians, whether to Jews, whether to Muslims, people who believe in Israel and want to get a fair, unbiased message across. We train people how to do it, how to speak, how to get that information across.
People need to get involved in the issue of Israel if you support Israel, because today there's unprecedented threats facing Israel. What are the top 3 things people can do to defend Israel?
I think number 1 is be knowledgeable. Get that information yourself from different sites such as mine, and there's many others out there. Second of all, get online. If you spend 2-3 minutes a day online doing some social media, do it for Israel. And thirdly, to speak to friends beyond the church door, beyond the obvious audience. Speak to people at work, speak to people socially, mention Israel, give Israel's argument and be involved. I think that even that small mention of how Israel is threatened, the threats that we have from Iran, from ISIS, from Hamas, from the enemies of the people of Israel, can make all that difference.
In your opinion, what are the 3 major threats Israel's most facing today?
1, Iran. 2, Iran. And 3, Iran. Today, the agreement which was set is unprecedented in what it gives the Iranian government. Within 8 years, anyone will be able to sell ballistic missiles to Iran. In 5 years, anyone will be able to sell regular weapons to Iran. It is leading within 10 years to a legalization that Iran will get the bomb. That is a threat to the very existence of the state of Israel. And I think that that's something that we've got to get a message out and say how actually dangerous this is.
You know, we thought this agreement would bring incredibly widespread condemnation at the grassroots level, but no one's really taken to the streets. No one's protesting. Why do you think there's been such a subdued reaction?
Well, I disagree with you. I think people have been demonstrating. The wrong people have been demonstrating. We only saw yesterday demonstrations in Iran, and they're still shouting after the agreement, death to America, death to Israel, death to England. Those are the people who are demonstrating. Unfortunately, the people on the other side should be demonstrating against this agreement. It is beyond me how someone can ignore the cry that we want to kill you. If there's one message, it would be believe people when they want to kill you and stop them.
You know, you go all over the world as an international speaker speaking on these issues. What kind of impact does that have?
I think people are becoming aware. I think the Christian world is rising up in anger against the agreement that was signed. Many Jewish audiences and just friends of Israel are saying that an agreement with Iran, which is signed right now, will allow Iran to go nuclear. And that is a threat to the Western world, to the Christian world, and to Israel, of course.
It's very obvious to everyone here that this is one of the worst deals ever signed in history. It will allow a nuclear Iran. It, in fact, pushes war instead of takes it back. But why is the international community voting for it? Why is there international support for this deal?
I think there's a naivety. I think there's a Western way of thinking, which is contractual. If we sign a contract, everything will be okay. The reality is you're dealing with a fundamentalism of Islam, which doesn't see a place for America, doesn't see a place for the West, doesn't see a place for Christians or Jews. Only their very narrow form of understanding what Islam is. Their wars against the infidel, and all of us are threatened by it.
One of the big threats that we face today is BDS, is the boycott, divestment, sanction move that we're seeing on the university campuses. What can students do to protest this new movement and uncover the mask as it really is just classic anti-Semitism?
I think one of the challenges is with BDS is to talk about BDS in a language to those people who would buy it. We've got to show that if you believe in peace, you have to be against BDS, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. If you believe in peace, don't support BDS, because BDS isn't pro-Palestinian, is anti-Israel. And as you suggested, what we're seeing is those people are calling for the destruction of Israel. Bottom line, the best answer to BDS is come visit Israel, come buy Israeli products. You know, we saw one store where they threatened BDS, so one group bought the whole of the Israeli products overnight. Have boycotts, buy the products of Israel, come visit Israel, and particularly support the Jewish community here.
Neil, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Which is come support Israel, become educated, become advocates for Israel. If every one of these millions of people watching us today could make a difference, then the movement to support the people of Israel in his holy city, Jerusalem, would be a cry which would be heard from heaven to earth.
Neil, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, shining light from Israel.
None of the 260 passengers and crew on a routine Air France flight from Tel Aviv to Paris were suspicious of the 4 people who boarded during a stopover in Athens. But within 15 minutes, the German-Palestinian terrorist squad had taken over the plane, forcing it to land in Entebbe, Uganda, where they were joined by more armed terrorists. After releasing most of the non-Israeli passengers, they threatened that if 53 jailed terrorists weren't freed by July 4th, they would massacre all the remaining 106 hostages. The Israeli government began to negotiate, while the army and Mossad started gathering intelligence and searching for military rescue options. It was a seemingly impossible mission. Entebbe was 2,400 miles away, in the heart of Africa, and the route there went through the airspace of enemy countries. Even if Israeli commandos could make it there unharmed, they would have to operate in unfamiliar surroundings with limited intel. If that wasn't enough, in addition to the terrorists, the airport was alive with hostile Ugandan army troops. But even if they overcame all these obstacles, they had yet to overcome the biggest challenge: time. They had to surprise the terrorists and eliminate them swiftly before they could execute the hostages, deeming the entire operation a failure. The task of planning the hostages' rescue and fighting the Ugandan army was given to Israel's elite Sayeret Matkal, led by Lieutenant Colonel Yoni Netanyahu.
Within less than 48 hours of planning by Yoni and his officers and training of the unit, a daring plan was prepared and the force was ready for action.
According to the overall plan of the IDF, 4 Hercules planes holding a selection of Israel's finest military and commando units would fly to Uganda at low altitude in order to evade enemy radar.
After landing, the rescue force headed by Yoni would move in a convoy led by a Mercedes mimicking Ugandan President Idi Amin's car in order to confuse the Ugandan soldiers and buy precious time on their way to the old terminal.
Other Sayeret forces would neutralize any Ugandan military reinforcements and disable the Ugandan fighter jets to prevent an aerial pursuit. The Israeli commandos struck with precision and speed.
I heard someone shouting that Yoni was hit. In parallel to this, the glass shattered and someone shot me in an automatic burst of fire from the inside. I shot him back. At the same time, my commander catched up with me. I turned left and killed another 2 terrorists. Within 15 seconds, 4 terrorists were dead and the whole operation was secured.
Within less than an hour since landing, the hostages were on board the planes on their way home. Despite the heroic efforts of the medical team, Yoni died of his wounds. The bold operation amazed the world and gave hope to Jews across the globe.
During my 9 years in prison, each time I heard an airplane in the skies of Ural, I thought about Entebbe, and I knew that a day will come when an Israeli airplane will take me home.
Yoni, an unknown hero until the operation, was mourned by the entire nation and became a legacy of courage, commitment, and leadership for generations of Israeli commanders.
Please stay tuned for the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
For I will take you from among the nations, gather you out of all countries, and bring you into your own land.
Over the past 35 years, the International Christian Embassy have been actively engaged in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. More than 120,000 Jews have been helped by the Christian Embassy to come back from the 4 corners of the world here to the land of Israel. The main focal point was always the former Soviet Union, and the people which came to Israel were Russians or from the Ukraine or from Belarus. Today we see a major shift taking place where for the first time the majority of Jewish people which are coming to Israel do come from first world countries.
The Hebrew word aliyah refers to the immigration of Jews from the diaspora to the land of Israel. According to recent statistics published by the Jewish Agency for Israel, immigration to Israel continued to increase in 2014 by 32% overall. While Aliyah numbers from Western Europe were up 177% in 2014, France alone saw its Aliyah numbers increase by 289%.
I think that I can clearly tell you that there is a greater interest among French Jews to move to Israel, to make Aliyah, or to consider Aliyah. It is not an operation like an Aliyah operation like we saw from countries like Ethiopia or Russia after the Iron Curtain was lifted, but we see here a great interest, and I believe this is something that is going to grow in this coming year.
Ukraine is another European country that has seen a significant increase in Aliyah in 2014. A struggling economy and continued tensions with Russia have contributed to many Ukrainian Jews considering the idea of moving to Israel. Penina Zubarev and her family made Aliyah from Ukraine in 2009. For the Zubarev family, starting a new life in Israel was a challenge.
Now it's a lot of Ukrainian Jews think about to leave Ukraine because it's so difficult time now to make money, to care about family. If you decide to leave Ukraine, you lose your Ukrainian citizenship and all benefits.
There is something in the atmosphere that is uncomfortable in some places, and people think, what do I do next? And I'm happy that the Jewish people consider Israel, their homeland, as the best alternative. If I can send a message to the Christian friends of Israel around the world is, please do two things. One thing is donate. Give the money that is necessary for the Israeli institutions to make the best way of Aliyah. And the second thing is to pray, because we need the prayers. We need to be in your hearts like we know we are already in, and we need to build this bridge of solidarity, working together for the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy.
As you have seen, we are living in a very special time of human history. God is opening a unique window of opportunity for the global body of Christ to actively be involved with the return of the Jewish people back to the land of Israel. Today, you personally can be involved with the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. You can help the Jewish people to return back to the land of their fathers, like the prophets of old foretold. Your donation and your prayer can make sure that the prophetic destiny of the Jewish people will become a reality today. So I want to invite you today to pray for the Aliyah of the Jewish people. Pray for the work of the Christian Embassy as we help the Jewish people to return back, but also consider making a generous gift in order to help us to return Jewish people from France, from the Ukraine, back to the land of Israel. We need your support, we need your prayers. May the Lord bless you richly out of Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.